It started with a broken vase. I was 6. A thin shard of glass on the living room floor, a thunderstorm of footsteps coming down the hall, and my brother, 2 years older, pointing a finger like a weapon. She did it. I hadn't. But it didn't matter. My father didn't ask questions. My mother didn't look at me. I was marched to my room, told to think about what I'd done. And that was the day I learned what my role would be. The one who carried blame like it was my birthright. After that, it became tradition. If something went missing, I took it. If someone got hurt, I caused it. If there was tension in the room, I was the static they couldn't wait to discharge. I once asked my mom why my brother never got grounded. She said, "He's sensitive. You're strong. You can handle it." But being strong always felt like code for being disposable. I tried to earn love like it was a currency. Straight A's, perfect attendance, chores done without being asked. I even learned how to cry silently, so I wouldn't ruin the mood. They never noticed my report cards, but they noticed if I left a glass in the sink or if my shirt wasn't ironed just right. Birthdays were especially cruel. Not because they forgot, but because they remembered in all the wrong ways. My brother got parties. I got polite dinners. He got surprise gifts. I got practical things. You're more mature, they'd say. You don't need all that. Maturity, responsibility. Those were the medals they gave me instead of affection. And I wore them like shackles. When I turned 16, I got a job. Not because they asked me to, because I wanted to stop asking for things. Every time I needed a ride, I got the same look. That thin-lipped sigh. That glance between them like here she goes again. So I learned to take the bus, to walk in the rain, to never, ever need more than the bare minimum. When I got into Stanford, I told them over dinner. They didn't look up from their plates. My brother had just been rejected from his top choice. They said it wasn't the right time to celebrate. He's going through a lot, Mom whispered. Tried to be understanding. So I sat in my room that night and cried into my acceptance letter. Not because I was proud, because I felt guilty for not failing like he did. On move-in day, they dropped me off like they were unloading groceries. No hugs, no pictures, just a quick "don't forget where you came from," as if the only thing I carried with me was shame. But I didn't forget. I carried it all. The guilt, the silence, the invisible label tattooed across my chest. The one who ruins everything. College was supposed to be freedom, and in some ways, it was. But even 300 miles away, blame found me. When my sister failed her midterms, my mother called me in tears. "She looked up to you," she said. "Maybe if you hadn't gone so far, she wouldn't feel so lost." When my brother wrecked his car, Dad texted, "Funny how things fall apart when you're not around to take the heat." They didn't miss me. They missed the target. And still I went home for every holiday. Brought gifts. Offered to cook. Laughed at the jokes they made at my expense. Because some part of me still believed that if I showed up enough times, they'd finally let me stay without asking me to bleed for it. But it never happened. On my 24th birthday, they forgot to call. But they posted a tribute to my brother for getting a new job. "So proud of our boy," Mom wrote. "He's been through so much." I stared at that post for hours, reading the comments. What a strong family. He must have the best support system. I thought about replying, tagging myself, saying something, anything. But instead, I logged off and sat in the dark. And in that dark, I realized something. They never wanted me healed. They wanted me quiet. They didn't see me as the light. They saw me as the lightning rod, the one who took the hit so they didn't have to. And maybe that's why I kept going back. Because deep down, I thought that if I could just absorb enough hurt, they'd run out of reasons to keep hurting me. But blame is a well that never runs dry when you're the only one drinking from it. So I stopped. Not with a scream. Not with a fight. Just a quiet, permanent decision to leave the room where love came with conditions. They taught me to carry their shame like it was mine. But I was never the one who dropped the vase. Freedom is a funny thing. People think it looks like leaving, but sometimes it looks like shrinking yourself just to stay unseen. College was 312 miles away, far enough that they couldn't drop in, close enough that their voices still rang in my head every time I did something good. I joined a student group, got straight A's again, landed a paid internship within 6 months. But every time I went to share a win, I heard my mother's voice from back home. "Don't brag. You know your brother's still figuring things out. So I didn't post about the promotion. Didn't share the news when I was invited to speak at a conference. I sat on my dorm bed with my hands shaking because I wanted to call someone but had no one to call who wouldn't turn my joy into a competition I never agreed to enter. Every holiday break, I went home like a soldier returning from a war I wasn't allowed to talk about. Thanksgiving was the worst. I brought a pie, homemade. My father took one bite and said, "Not as good as your mother's, but points for trying." My brother got drunk, yelled at me for making everything about yourself when all I'd done was answer a question about how my job was going. My sister rolled her eyes when I laughed. My mother asked if I was still dressing so formal at work, like self-respect was an act of aggression. They talked over me, talked about me, and when I fell quiet, they said I was being cold. You can't win a game when the rules were made to break you. I started sending money for birthdays, for my sister's rent, for things they never said thank you for but always expected again. My therapist called it emotional taxation. I called it peacekeeping, because giving them money was easier than giving them truth. I tried once, after a particularly cruel phone call where my mom accused me of thinking I was better than them. I said, "I just want to be treated like I matter too." She hung up, called back the next day, but not to apologize. "You're just going through a selfish phase. Don't let your success make you arrogant." I stopped bringing people home with me. Boyfriends, friends, no one. Because they always ask the same thing afterward. Why do they talk to you like that? And I never had a good answer. At work, I was being promoted, offered more responsibility, more visibility, a better title. My boss, an older woman with kind eyes, told me over coffee, "You have leadership in you, but you act like you're apologizing for taking up space." I swallowed hard, nodded, but that night, I lay awake in my apartment and realized I didn't know how to lead without guilt attached to every step. Because every time I succeeded, I heard their voices. "Must be nice. Don't forget who helped you." Not everyone gets to be lucky, but it wasn't luck. It was hard, grueling, earned with late nights and imposter syndrome and panic attacks. I hid in bathroom stalls between meetings. I wanted them to say they were proud, just once. But pride requires perspective. And all they saw was that I was further from them than they ever expected me to get. When my brother got fired, Mom called me. "He's depressed. It'd mean a lot if you sent something." I did. Again, $500. He never texted me. But 2 weeks later, he posted a photo with new shoes and the caption, "Some people eat. I step." I didn't like it. I didn't say a word. I just sat with the ache of realizing that I was the family wallet, not the family. They called me when they needed things, never when I was hurting. When I got COVID, I told them from the air. Mom said, "Well, at least you can afford good healthcare," and hung up. After that, I started pulling away. Little things, less texts, less visits, but the guilt, it lingered. Because when you're raised to believe you're only valuable when you're useful, pulling away feels like betrayal. I started journaling, writing down every time they dismissed me, every moment they turned my joy into guilt. It wasn't to punish them. It was to remind myself that the hurt had a history. Because the more distance I got, the more clearly I saw they didn't hate my success. They hated that my success made it harder to control me. And no matter how far I ran, they'd keep trying to rewrite the story where I was still the villain and they were still the victims of the daughter who changed. I didn't change. I just started listening to the version of me that didn't beg to be loved anymore. Success doesn't always echo in applause. Sometimes, it sounds like silence from the people you hoped would clap first. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. I was halfway through meal prepping, some podcast humming in the background, when Dad's name lit up on the screen. I let it ring 4 times, then picked up. "I wish I hadn't. We need your help. The business is in trouble." His voice was low, calculated, the same tone he used when I was 12, and he told me it was my fault that Mom had cried all week. I sat down on the cold kitchen tile, letting the silence stretch. He explained that the family store, a dusty little place with fading signage and less foot traffic, was bleeding money. "We just need a fresh start, a rebrand. You've got the skills. You're the successful one, right?" I should have said no, but the way he said you made something inside me sit up, like the child who still wanted to hear that she was finally enough. So I agreed, stupidly. I built them a website, redesigned their logo, ran a digital campaign. Within 2 months, sales were up 40%. Local press wrote a feature. They didn't thank me, but they bragged about me to everyone else. Mom posted, "So proud of our family business getting a second wind." No mention of me. But I let it go, because I thought maybe this time I'd earn my seat at the table. Then came the real ask. "We need you to co-sign a loan. Nothing major, just a formality. You're the only one with good credit." I paused. "How much?" "How much?" $60,000. The number knocked the air out of me. But Dad was already talking fast words like expansion and trust, and we'll pay it off quickly. I told them I'd think about it. I called my therapist. We talked boundaries, patterns, the history of manipulation that always started with "you're the only one who can help." But still, I said yes, with conditions. Everything in writing, strict repayment schedule, control over business finances until it was paid off. Dad agreed, reluctantly, but agreed. I emailed the document, signed it, saved a copy, and for a few weeks, things were fine. Better, even. Mom called to ask how I was. Celeste sent me a birthday text with a slightly too cheerful emoji. It felt fake, but it also felt calm, and I was so tired of fighting. Then, the transfers started slowing. Payments came late. Numbers weren't matching. I logged into the business account and saw charges that didn't make sense. Nail salon, casino, an online boutique. I called Dad. He answered on speaker. "You're overreacting," he said. "We needed a little joy. It's not like we're stealing from you." I reminded him of the agreement, the terms, the trust. He laughed. "What, you're gonna sue your own parents? You think that loan makes you better than us?" The words hit harder than I expected, because they sounded familiar, because they sounded rehearsed, because he said them the same way he used to when I'd cry over being blamed for things I didn't do. I hung up and cried, not because of the money, but because I knew this was the final test I was always going to fail. They didn't want help. They wanted control. And now, they had me, legally, emotionally, hooked like a fish with the bait of belonging. I called the bank, reviewed the documents. Technically, I could pull out, reclaim full control, but it would destroy them, financially. And somehow, that still made me hesitate. Because even after all of it, the guilt, the gaslighting, the years of being the family landfill, a piece of me still wanted to be loved by people who only loved me when they needed something. A week later, I got a call from a family friend. She sounded nervous. "I just thought you should know your dad's been saying some things, telling people you're trying to take the business from him, that you only helped so you could feel superior." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because betrayal feels quieter when you expect it. That night, I opened a folder on my desktop, renamed it Evidence. Every invoice, every email, screenshots, messages, the original loan terms. I wasn't going to war. I was building an escape hatch. I'd spent my whole life trying to help people who decut my parachute and told me to jump. Not again. They called it a loan, but it was always a leash. And this time, I'm the one cutting the cord. It started with an invitation, an innocent one on the surface. "Just dinner," Mom said. "Nothing serious. We haven't seen you in a while." I paused before responding. There was a tightness in my chest that never used to be there before I heard her voice. But something in me, the version still hoping for peace, for closure, for maybe just one quiet meal that didn't turn into a minefield, said yes. I wore a soft sweater, the kind that made me feel small but in control. Hair down, keys in hand, walls up. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked exactly the same. The crooked porch light, the smell of detergent through an open window, the same potted plant that had died and been replaced so many times no one remembered the original. I stepped inside. They were all there, not just Mom and Dad, but Celeste, Uncle Raymond, and Georgina, even my cousin who never liked me. The table was full, but not with food, with folders, papers, printed emails, bank statements. And just like that, I knew this wasn't dinner, this was court, and I was the defendant. Mom gestured to the couch. "We thought it was time to clear the air." I sat, slowly, carefully, like the floor might disappear. Celeste was the first to speak. "You've been acting superior, controlling the business, disrespecting Dad." Dad chimed in. "You think your little website makes you a CEO? You think loaning us money gives you authority?" My voice stayed stuck in my throat, but I managed. "You asked for my help. Mom leaned forward. We didn't ask to be managed. Families support each other without trying to take over. I looked at them, all of them, the people who'd let me bleed for years without ever offering a bandage. And now they were accusing me of being the one holding the knife. Uncle Raymond unfolded a piece of paper. We've spoken to a lawyer. There are options to legally shift the business structure. You're not the only one with a stake. And Georgina nodded like a parrot. You've made things so hostile. We can't even feel like a family anymore. I felt my pulse in my teeth, in my fingertips, in the base of my skull. So this isn't about the loan, I said, voice steadier than I felt. This is about control. You feel threatened because I held up a mirror. Dad slammed a fist on the table. No, this is about you thinking you're better than the rest of us. And that's when Mom said it. Not in anger, not in heat, in that chilling, practiced tone she reserved for her most precise cuts. I think it is best if you go. Not just from the house, from the family. I blinked. She didn't. And in that silence, 1,000 memories collapsed at once. Birthday candles that never got lit. Apologies I gave for things I didn't do. My brother's college rejection. My sister's bad grades. The broken vase. All of it, piled on my back like a second spine. But something inside me didn't break. It opened. I stood, looked each one in the eye, not with fury, with clarity. You don't get to exile me from a place I never belonged, Celeste scoffed. You'll come crawling back. I smiled. You want to be able to reach me when you realize you needed me more than I ever needed you. I walked out, calm, measured, the way you walk after setting something heavy down for the very last time. Outside, the air smelled like rain, but not the kind that ruins things. The kind that washes away what never deserved to stay. I sat in my car for a minute, hands trembling, and then I whispered something I'd never said out loud until that night. I am allowed to leave, even if they call it betrayal. That was the last time I stepped inside that house. The last time I let them define my worth by how much blame I was willing to absorb. The next morning, I booked a one-way flight. Not to run, to reclaim. They called it a family meeting, but it was a performance. What they didn't expect was for me to finally stop playing my part. The suitcase didn't feel heavy, not because I packed light, I didn't, but because for the first time, I wasn't carrying guilt. I left the next morning. No goodbye, no final text, no warning, just an airport, a window seat, and a silent vow. I will no longer play the villain in their story just because I chose to save myself. I landed in Seattle at midnight. The city hummed, quiet and unfamiliar. It didn't care who I used to be, and that felt like relief. My new apartment smelled like fresh paint, cheap soap, possibility. I stood in the middle of the empty living room with the suitcase at my feet and breathed in a silence that didn't ask me to explain itself. The first few days were disorienting. No passive-aggressive texts, no guilt-laced phone calls, no fake check-ins meant to lead back to money or manipulation. Just me, and the echo of my own voice finally coming back to life. On day 6, I opened my laptop and started a document. Title: Quiet Betrayals. It wasn't for them. It wasn't even for revenge. It was for me. Because sometimes, you need to write it all down to stop pretending it wasn't that bad. Line by line, I wrote, when Mom told me I was too intense after I cried over being bullied. When Dad said, you're just trying to get attention, after I won an award and he didn't show up. When they forgot my birthday, twice, but threw a surprise party for my brother the next week. When Celeste said, your trauma makes everything about you, because I asked them to stop joking about therapy. When I was 17 and told Mom I thought I was depressed, and she said, you just need more sleep. When they borrowed money, and instead of paying me back, called me selfish for asking about it. When Dad told a room full of relatives that I was emotionally unstable after I confronted him about the loan. When they all sat across from me at that ambush dinner, and not one of them stood up for me. Page after page, quiet betrayals. Not the kind that make headlines. The kind that make you question if you were ever loved at all. I cried, then didn't. I deleted nothing. And when I was done, I saved it. Not as evidence, as closure. Because healing isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing what you carry forward. And I was done carrying their shame. I found a new job, a team that respected me, co-workers who didn't assume my competence was arrogance. I started walking every morning. No music, just footsteps, just breath. And somewhere along the way, I began to feel like a real person again. I bought a whiteboard, hung it by my bed, wrote 3 things every night. What I survived, what I deserve, what I will no longer accept. It didn't fix everything, but it reminded me that I was no longer auditioning for love that came with strings. I changed my number, deleted old voicemails, unfollowed every cousin who thought neutrality was kindness. A few weeks later, I mailed a letter, not for response, for record. 1 copy to my parents, 1 to Celeste. Short, clear. I accept that you've made me the villain in your version of the story, but I refuse to keep living inside it. I forgive you, not because you've asked, but because I'm done holding poison and calling it love. No return address, just initials and silence. That weekend, I bought flowers for myself. White tulips, the kind Mom used to say were pretentious. I put them on the table beside my favorite mug and lit a candle that smelled like nothing from my childhood. I sat with my grief like it was an old friend who finally learned how to listen. Some betrayals don't scream, they whisper, and sometimes the quietest ones do the most damage. But naming them is how you take your voice back. It was the bowl that did it. Crooked, glazed in uneven blues, warped just enough to spill water if you filled it too high. But it was mine. The first thing I made in pottery class, and the first thing I didn't apologize for. The instructor called it abstract. I called it healing, because when you've spent your life earning your place at someone else's table, making something with your own hands and knowing no one can take it from you feels like a rebellion. I never used to want things. Not really. Not because I didn't dream, but because dreaming felt dangerous. Like the moment I wanted something too loudly, someone would show up to shame me for it. So I stayed small, safe, a minimalist in my own life, never ordering dessert, never buying the dress, never asking for the last word. But in Seattle, things shifted. Not all at once, but gently. The way snow melts not because it's weak, but because the season finally changed. I started with small things, scented lotion, candles that smelled like places I'd never been, books I wanted to read, not the ones I felt I should. And then came the bigger wants. Weekend pottery, a bike ride with no destination, saying no to overtime. Wanting without guilt was like learning to breathe in a new language. Strange at first, then beautiful. I met Amira in pottery class. Her laugh came easy. Her eyes felt like exclamation points. She complimented my bowl, said it looked like the sky trying to remember the ocean. We became friends, slowly, softly. She didn't ask for backstory, just offered me pieces of her life without demand. We met for coffee every Sunday, shared pastries, talked about everything and sometimes nothing. And for the first time in years, I spoke without editing myself for survival. One afternoon she asked, "What do you want? Not for lunch, not next weekend, for your life." I stared at my mug. The steam curled like a question mark. I don't know. It felt like confession. She nodded, didn't press, just said, "Then start with what you don't want." Sometimes that's easier. That night, I wrote a list, things I didn't want, to feel guilty for resting, to explain why I left, to hand out pieces of myself like samples at a store. Then I added another section, things I might want someday. To adopt a cat, to grow herbs in the kitchen window, to laugh loudly, to write, to dance at home with the lights off, to be known. The list felt dangerous and necessary, like building a ladder out of a house that tried to keep me in the basement. I planted basil. It died in a week, but I tried again. This time it lived. I adopted a cat from the shelter. Her name is Nori. She only likes rain sounds and tuna treats, and she's mine. I signed up for a free writing workshop. Wrote a short piece about a girl who disappeared from her family's table and no one noticed until she was replaced by someone who never asked to be whole. The class applauded, and I didn't apologize for how personal it sounded. Weeks passed. Seasons turned. I took pictures of sunrises, burned toast, let myself sleep in on Sundays. I still had moments, waves. Grief is a tide you don't always see coming, but I learned to ride it, not run from it. And in the silence that used to haunt me, I found peace. One day, a message came through, not to my new number, to an old email, forwarded from a work contact. "Dad's been arrested. We need you." Short, cold. I didn't reply, not because I wasn't curious, but because curiosity isn't the same as obligation, and I owed them nothing. I closed the email, fed Nori, lit a candle, sat by my crooked bowl, and felt nothing but gratitude that I'd finally built a life that didn't collapse every time they tried to reach inside it. I used to believe wanting something meant I was selfish. Now I know it just means I'm finally listening to myself. I wasn't expecting her. It was a Wednesday. Gray skies. Rain like static on the windows. I just made tea when the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and there she was. Celeste. Soaked in designer boots and excuses. I didn't open the door. Not at first. Not until she texted, "Please, it's not what you think." I cracked the door. Not wide. Not welcoming. Just enough to show her I didn't need to hide, but I wasn't here to offer comfort either. She looked tired, but not sorry. They never look sorry until the consequences show up. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. Not because she deserved it. Because I needed to hear it from her lips. Needed to confirm that everything I'd walked away from was still rotting. She sat on the edge of the couch like she wasn't sure it would hold her weight. I stood. "Dad got arrested. Fraud. Embezzlement." She said it like she was reading a headline, like it was happening to her. I didn't speak. "They're blaming you." I blinked. "For what?" They said, "You pushed him to take the loan. That you abandoned us. That you knew he was unstable." I laughed. Not the funny kind. The kind that cracks something you didn't know you were still protecting. They always needed someone to blame. Glad to know some things haven't changed. Celeste looked smaller now. Her makeup fading under rain and reality. "They're scared. They want you to come home. To fix this." I stared at her. "Home?" I pointed to my walls. "This is home. The one I built from the rubble they left me in." She looked at the floor. "They say you betrayed them." I stepped closer. "You want to know what betrayal looks like? It looks like sitting across from someone you called family and watching them lie with a straight face. It looks like signing a loan to save the family business only to be thrown out when I asked for accountability." I could feel my voice rising, but I didn't lower it. "Not this time. You all broke me, Celeste. Quietly, constantly. And now that your house of cards has collapsed, you want me to crawl back and hold it up again?" She didn't answer, and I realized she didn't come for reconciliation. She came for rescue, and that was never my job. I walked to the door, held it open. "Tell them I said this. You taught me how to survive, but I taught myself how to live, and I'm not coming back just to drown again." She left. No goodbye, no closure, but I didn't need it. Because this was the moment I knew my voice wasn't fragile. It had always been strong. They just spent years telling me to whisper. That night, I told my boss everything. The family drama, the loan, the emails. She nodded, supported me, offered resources, legal support. I'd never had that before. Someone who believed me without needing me to bleed first. Weeks passed. I joined a support group, shared my story, slowly, shakily, and found that my pain wasn't a prison anymore. It was a map. A girl named Maya cried when I told her my family made me feel like I was too much. "Me too," she said, and for the first time, I wasn't alone in my too muchness. Our scars overlapped, but so did our healing. They came looking for the version of me that didn't know how to say no, but that girl is gone. And in her place is someone who finally knows silence is not the same thing as peace. A year later, I met my mother for coffee. Not by request, by decision. She reached out. A letter, handwritten. No guilt, no demands. Just this. "I know I've hurt you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you're well. Love, Mom." It wasn't enough, but it was a start. We met in a cafe with wide windows and soft jazz. She looked older, tired, less polished, more human. We didn't talk about Dad, or the loan, or the betrayal. Not yet. We talked about the weather, about books, about how tulips still reminded her of me. It was strange, and soft, and just far enough from the past to not snap open the wounds. She said, "You don't owe me anything, but thank you for showing up." I nodded, and that was enough. Not forgiveness, not reunion, just enough. Later, I walked home, alone, on purpose. Nori met me at the door with her usual indignation. I made tea, lit a candle, sat on the couch beneath the lopsided bowl. Amira called, wanted to plan a weekend getaway, pottery retreat. I said yes without overthinking it. I no longer needed permission to enjoy my own life. My sister never reached out again. Dad served time. The business closed. I heard from someone that they told everyone I'd abandoned them. I didn't correct the story. I didn't need to, because healing taught me that truth doesn't need an audience, only acceptance. I teach workshops now, help people put their pain into words, not to relive it, to reclaim it. A girl once asked, "How did you finally know it was okay to leave?" I smiled. When I realized I'd already left the moment I stopped blaming myself for their inability to love me well. I keep the old list in a drawer, the one titled Quiet Betrayals, and every year I write a new one beside it. Quiet Victories. Last year's included saying no without guilt, dancing alone in my kitchen, laughing so hard I cried, saying I love you to myself, not answering the phone. This year's list is longer and growing. They wrote me into their story as the villain, but I started a new story where I didn't have to earn my place. I just lived, and for once, that was enough.